So what I did is I went to the American Community Survey, downloaded, as one does, 5 million observations to my hard drive and spent 8 minutes analysing it. That's the empirical revolution. And what I did is I looked at everyone who'd been an economics major in college in the US over the past, I think it was 3 years. And then I just listed their occupations from most common to least common. So the most common is our students are managers and administrators, our students are lawyers, they're accountants and auditors, they're other financial specialists, they're financial managers, they're supervisors and proprietors of sales jobs, they're chief executives and public administrators, they're salespersons, they're high school and college instructors, and they're management analysts. You'll notice that Federal Reserve Chief is not actually among this list of job titles. And in fact, I have to go all the way to number 16 before I get economist on the list. And so, and I should be clear, and the only reason economist is on the list is because its occupation code also includes market researchers and survey researchers. And here, so the kids we're teaching don't want to be exactly like us. Shouldn't be that surprising. But time and again, I think we make the mistake of thinking, I've got to teach them this style of economics because this is what economics is. But economics, as they're going to apply it, is all about how it's relevant to these sorts of jobs that the kids are doing. We could also look at what industry our students are in. And you can see that they're actually fairly broadly spread across the spectrum. There's a lot of people working in professional services, so maybe we should think about what's useful for them. And there's a fair few in finance. But actually, let me not just show you the industry distribution across economics majors. I want to show it to you across people who have other degrees as well. And so that's what the green bars are. And the most striking thing to me is how similar the green bars are to the purple bars, which is to say that our students actually are not particularly specialised in economisty stuff. Our students actually go on and work in industries that aren't that different than our colleagues who are teaching English or science or other classes as well. And so when we think about what useful economics is, we've got to stop thinking about Ben Bernanke. We've got to start thinking about these guys, right? Now, there's a couple of differences. In fact, we're actually slightly less represented in professional services. Fortunately, not many of our students are becoming secretaries. And we're slightly overrepresented in finance, but let's not overstate that, right? It's still only about 1/5 of our students are going into the finance industry, broadly defined. That means, and that's the majors, so that means the others are not. The other radical change I've not seen the profession spend enough time grappling with is this dramatic change in who's becoming an economist. Turns out there was a time when economists looked like me. They were white men, right, with Australian accents. It's just not true anymore. Economics has become, particularly at the undergraduate level, incredibly heavily feminized. And recognizing that, it's probably time that we spend a little bit less, we should probably need to spend a little bit less time talking about, using Alex Rodriguez as the example when we teach comparative advantage, and a little bit more thinking about broader examples that are going to be relevant to the kids who are actually taking our classes. Now, I don't want to mislead you with this chart. I'm saying there's been a sea change, and as much as women are still underrepresented in economics, look, the number's still below 50%. They're still getting close to being nationwide half of our economics majors. And if you go back to the principals level, they're actually more than half the students. And this is not just an economics phenomenon. This is actually, just the fact that this is the century of women, right? They're going to school, they're kicking guys' asses. And, I think nationwide now, we're about 60% female. And so I think this is a huge challenge for the profession to think about. But my suspicion, purely anecdotal, is that there is an even stronger demand for useful economics, an even more pragmatic approach to what it is education means among our female students. And I'm not quite sure how to quantify that. We actually ran a survey a couple of years among several instructors asking about these issues. They certainly seem to be aware of the issue, but that's, at the very least, it's something that bears thinking about. How now do I put some meat around this idea of teaching useful economics? And what I'm going to do is just give you a few suggestive ideas. And admit up front this is an unfinished project. So I think comparative advantage is an interesting one. You talk to a professional economist and we say the comparative advantage is one of the most interesting, non-obvious insights in all of economics. And then look at how we teach it. We say England and Portugal can either produce wine or cloth. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It's particularly helpful if you're the Prime Minister of England or Portugal. If you're not, there's nothing here for you. The whole way we teach this is absurd. Countries don't get to decide, individuals do. And so the point is that comparative advantage is still true, beautiful, and powerful. It's also applicable and relevant to our students. And what we've got to do is move along and think about what that is. Comparative advantage is fundamentally a theory that's simply about the efficient allocation of tasks. I want to allocate tasks to people for whom the opportunity cost is the smallest. Saying that sentence is easy. The rest, we have to do all this math because the kids get confused all the time. But when you say it that way, it's about allocating tasks efficiently. And tasks are allocated efficiently when they go to the person with the lowest opportunity cost. It's actually a very simple concept. And then you want to think about what are the tasks that our kids want to think about. Our kids are not involved in wine versus cloth. But in my house, who has to walk the dog? Well, it turns out that if I'm really working hard to meet a deadline, my partner Betsy walks the dog. And if she's working hard to meet a deadline, I walk the dog. That's the principle of comparative advantage. We're looking at our opportunity costs. And when I'm working hard towards a deadline, the opportunity cost of me walking the dog is that a paper doesn't get finished. And so it suggests that Betsy should walk the dog. Comparative advantage is about the allocation of tasks within a firm. Think about the firms we all belong to. We all belong to economics departments. There's a question that comes up in the faculty meeting, who should teach principles of economics? And it really should be the person who's terrible at teaching anything else. The second example I want to give you is thinking about externalities. How do we normally do it? Teach externalities? Well, there's a factory that emits some pollutant, never named, into a river that again isn't named, and it hurts some fishermen downstream. What should happen? The truth is, our students not many of them are going to be fishermen, and I apologise to those of you from Maine, but the idea of externalities is pervasive and comes up every day in our lives. We just have to start thinking about it, right? So in a business, if you're the CEO of a business, it's true in every business. The sales manager always comes to you and says, I need more sales guys. Hire me more sales guys. And the reason he or she's doing that, first of all, is sales guys are always overconfident. And secondly, it doesn't cost them anything, which is you're going to give them another sales guy, then they'll hit their sales target, and then they'll get their bonus at the end of the year. What the sales guy is not doing, he's not thinking about the fact that if you say yes, then you're going to have to buy another computer for the new sales guy. You're going to have to buy another office for the new sales guy. You're going to have to go out and hire and train the new sales guy. And I should say, in Australia, by the way, guy is non-gendered. The sales manager's never thinking about that. And as a CEO, it's your job to think about those externalities, and it's your job to internalize them. And this now is a way in which the concept of externalities has direct managerial significance in the sorts of roles that our students are going to play, right? Or, for our students, the most obvious one, and we were just talking about team-based learning at lunch, right? What do you do when you're in a team? If you're an economist, you free ride. If you're a normal person, you try and learn. And then how do you solve these free rider problems? And our students actually have a very sophisticated understanding of this because some of them have been in really bad teams. And being in a really bad team is one of the most important learning experiences that they can have. But they can understand, and there's a concept for them here, externalities, and that there's a standard set of tools that you can use to combat externalities are things that they can actually deploy in their lives. And then you could also just think about this from the intrapersonal perspective. So why is it we eat too much, or we exercise too little, or we don't study enough? And I think the standard way psychologists are convincing, people like Danny Kahneman are convincing us to think about it is, in fact, we're locked in a constant battle with ourselves. There's today's me, and there's tomorrow's me. And so let me give the final example, because I wanted to give a macroeconomic example, is to think about investment. And so, there's always the investment chapter in the textbook, and the day you talk about investment, you say that investment depends on the real rate of interest. The higher the rate of interest, then the less likely you are to invest. The point is, the whole theory of investment is fundamentally about making decisions about today versus tomorrow. And you're going to be doing that whether you own a factory that's deciding whether to build, buy another tractor, or whether you're making other investments. Now, students, for instance, are making real-life investments all the time. They're investing in their human capital. There's nothing fundamentally different between investing in a factory and investing in human capital. The only difference is that our students actually, many of them, invest in human capital, and almost none of them actually buy factories. And so the same arguments and the same framework for analysis works just as much for analysing human capital as it does for physical capital, and you can go a step further and think about health capital and social capital as well. And I think when I try and think about this more broadly, what I want to do is, the way we typically teach macro, each lecture gets like a letter, right? So y equals c plus I plus g plus x minus m. And then what we do is we teach a class on C and a class on I and a class on G and then a class on X minus M. What if instead we actually refocused macro around the roles that our students actually play in the economy. It's actually not that different in that our students are consumers. Well, if you're a consumer and you face a decision between spending and saving, how should you think about that? Our students are also investors. This is the point I just made. Our students are making decisions that have delayed payoffs. So what's the general theory of that? Our students may not be governments all of the time, and so maybe this doesn't apply quite so equally when it comes to G, but our students certainly are importers and exporters as well. And so the claim that I want to make is thinking about the roles they play, and they do play these roles, maybe actually more useful economics than thinking about the national accounting aggregate that behaviour will later feed on into when the BEA calculates all the numbers. So this is the part of the talk where I told you I'd do this. I'm going to admit that this is an unfinished project. I'm trying to think about what are ways in which we can think about useful economics. And this is sort of how I do it. I sit down, I get a chapter from my book, and I think, okay, what's here that's useful? And what are the applications and the way in which people who are not going to be professional economists are going to find this useful in their lives? And then what here is not? And what I want to invite you to do, and I mean this with the utmost sincerity, is think about whatever chapter you're currently teaching, or think about a random chapter, and think about what part of that can be turned into useful economics and how, and also think about what part of that's actually not useful economics. You know, one is that we list the fact that there are 12 Federal Reserve banks all around the country, which I think is helpful to no one, including Ben Bernanke. And so how is it that we can delete and create the white space which we can then later on fill with useful economics? And so I mean this as a sincere invitation, and maybe we can do it a little during Q&A if you've got ideas. I really want to hear your ideas on ways in which we can do this. I think it's not easy. My efforts at this, waking up at 5 a.m. have not been, it's never easy, but my experience has also been if you try hard enough, you can eventually find that there's a reason we're teaching everything. We just sometimes hide it. So let me stop there. You know, the argument I really just want to make is simple. There is a core of something called useful economics, and it's something that's based on an understanding of the roles that our students will actually play in the economy. We want to help them make good decisions, and those good decisions are going to be based on broadly applicable principles. And I think there's a unique opportunity. I think this is the time and the place to do it. I think we as a profession are in a position to deliver it. I think there's enormous demand from the students that are out there to do this. And I really do want your help in trying to think about more useful ways in which we can create useful economics.